Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Criterion podcast. Today, we actually are blessed by having a guest. Joining me, editor in chief of the Criterion, Chris DeLeon, is our beloved student trustee, Amara Hobbs. How are you doing, Amara?
I'm good. How are you, Chris?
I am doing very good. Now, we are going to be discussing a topic that has been a relatively hot button issue fairly recently, something that actually hasn't been much of a problem for us in the past, but this year has certainly garnered a lot of attention. And because of the nature of the complaints, we thought it'd be very good to bring in somebody that is both one of the most visible students on campus, as well as one of the most respected with our student trustee. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce the topic here, Amara,
Okay.
so that people understand what I'm talking about. And that is actually the Criterion's Blotter. Now,
Okay.
we were relatively surprised this year when the blotter became a matter of contention. You know, a lot of times we run articles with opinions. Some people don't like the opinions, other people do. It causes debate,
Right.
and that can be great. But it was really surprising to us that more than once this year already, there's been some very strong opinions about our blotter section, which is just a report of police activity that involves either CMU students, faculty members, trustees, or stuff that happens on CMU as a campus. And it's just a news reporting. However, the big issue has really stemmed around MIPs and naming the students that are contacted by the police and arrested by the police for being a minor in possession. So, Amara, you had actually raised some concerns previously about this. So why don't you just kind of give us a general breakdown of what your initial concerns were?
Sure. So I just going through the process, I had a couple students come to me and raise some of the concerns that they had with reading the blotter. And so from hindsight or just looking at the blotter in general, I was a little concerned at first looking at student names and the age that they had and what they were charged with. But doing some research and talking to some administrators here on campus, I think I got better insight and more information on why that information is public and why it's utilized. And so I think I had a full circle coming around and not understanding why there was that information provided and then why we need to provide that information. So I definitely want to be transparent in saying that I didn't necessarily know if I agreed with why it was posted, but now just being educated, I support you throughout that decision. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the next couple questions, I'm sure.
Okay, now let's just go ahead and jump right into that. In our discussions prior to doing the podcast, you'd mentioned that some of your information had come from John.
Sure.
So would you be willing to break that down for us?
Yeah, so I had a meeting with John Marshall. As a student trustee, I often have standing meetings with John Marshall and Tim Foster just to make sure that all of the information I'm receiving as a student trustee or presenting to the student body and even the board of trustees is accurate. I want to make sure that I'm getting the most descriptive information or true and knowledgeable information. So when I'm providing context to any students, they have the ability to know that I am knowledgeable about certain subjects and that I'm there advocating in their behalf. So I met with John Marshall and I asked, with doing some of my own research, there is what's called the Clery Act, which is a federal statute here in the United States that basically reiterates that a university has to disclose information about crime, and that's due to the Janine Cleary Act and her story years ago at Lee University, and that's what triggered the statute in general. So, and that was regarding sexual assault. So I got some insight from John and Mr. Marshall, and he provided me with just some more information about how universities utilize this act and how they have to follow the regulations on campus. So basically what happens is he will sit down with the PD, the Grand Junction Police Department, and they will go through the crime log. There's a daily crime log that happens, and so they will go through and filter out if there are students on campus that have been arrested. And I want to clarify the term arrest because I believe when people think of, oh, you were arrested, that's you being put in handcuffs and then going to jail. And that's just not the true definition. The true definition or term of arrest is, you know, having your rights given to you, providing a ticket, and then you are literally under arrest during that time of them providing you that information that you have disregarded the law. So for an example, an MIP is an arrest. So I got a lot of insight on that. We talked about some experiences that could have been brought up from students, or maybe their perspective on why they disagree with their names being put in the blotter, or if it is unreasonable. And it just goes back to the Clery law that we are mandated to have that information public. Anybody can come into student services. Anybody can go to the GJ Sentinel or the Grand Junction Police Department and access that information. It is available to everybody for that reason, that if something true and something has happened to an individual and they want more information, or if somebody else wants information on that subject, they can provide information or any knowledge on the crime that has been committed.
Okay, thank you so much for breaking that down. That was very informative. And I really appreciate the explanation for what an arrest really is, because that's also been an issue that has come up, not just this year, but some years in the past. Some people would say, well, I wasn't arrested.
Mm-hmm.
But again, according to all the police records that we had accessed, it did state
An
arrest, specifically because it met the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they weren't necessarily, slapped with handcuffs and spend a night in jail or anything.
Right.
But for the duration of their interaction with the police, they were under arrest at that time.
Yes, and that is the definition of the term.
And then what's really been funny is, or I don't want to say funny like haha, but I mean funny as in odd really,
Mm-hmm.
is the FERPA Act has actually been brought up as someone tried to raise the accusation that reporting an MIP was actually a violation of FERPA. Now, I do want to break it down and just provide a slight explanation for why it is not. And that is because FERPA specifically goes toward disciplinary actions that take place within a university.
Yes.
Say, an RA write-up, if a student's getting in trouble in class and there's disciplinary actions that are taken from that standpoint, absolutely, all of that falls under FERPA. Anything that involves the police, as you've so eloquently stated, is a matter of public record.
Yes.
It is not a matter of disciplinary action that takes place within the university. So then we get into, motivation versus the result. Some people have been trying to say that it's mean, or that the Criterion is engaged in any sort of bullying action because of publishing a blotter. So I know you and I have spoken offline about this, but I want to just say it again while we're here being recorded for this podcast.
Yeah.
Is when you look at newspapers always have a blotter. They report on police activity that takes place within their community, and that's exactly what the CMU Criterion does. It's just that our community exists solely within the CMU spectrum. So we're talking about students, faculty, staff of the university, or activity that takes place on campus. And one of the reasons then why an MIP might stand out is because we don't actually have that much crime.
Right.
One of the things that you had mentioned was previously in our conversation was the requirements of the Clery Act.
Yes.
Now, why don't you go ahead and explain why CMU just reports weekly versus daily on that?
And so, from my understanding, the Colorado Mesa University reports weekly instead of daily because our crime logs here on campus are so minimal. And that's not to say that they aren't happening or there's not things that are going on or students who aren't getting or being under arrest. It's just that we have such a smaller load than maybe we're seeing in larger universities or different areas and demographics. And so we are lucky enough that we get to report weekly instead of daily. And so, but that doesn't discredit the fact that we also follow the log daily. So we, as a university, are held up to a standard to look at the daily crime log, which is given by the Grand Junction Police Department. And so we will compile all of those things, and then the CRITE is provided that information to use in the weekly crime blotter.
Yeah, and it really is unique. I don't think there's probably a lot of universities that are able to have that weekly reporting versus daily reporting.
Right, 100%.
And that's really one of the things that is wonderful about attending this university is it really is a lot safer of a university to attend than several others. I've said several times just in conversations with people that if it wasn't for bike theft and MIPs, both of which are nonviolent crimes, we might not even have a blotter for several weeks at a time. Even with those, sometimes we'll go weeks at a time with nothing to report. And I think that's really telling about what a great university this is. But the turnaround on that is that then when we end up with a blotter like we recently had, where there was just a single student that was mentioned and that student got an MIP, then suddenly, instead of looking at it as just a news reporting, there was people that were concerned that we were somehow shaming this poor student or taking delight in the difficulties that this student was facing. And the truth is, all we were doing was reporting exactly what we would be doing, even if there were 10 crimes. But if there were several crimes, and we're talking bike theft, we're talking assault, we're talking sexual assault, if there were things like that were happening, nobody would have even noticed that this one poor girl had gotten an MIP that week.
Sure. And so going off of that, I think it's also important to mention that we are very lucky on this campus that we don't have a ton of crime that's occurring or, crime is crime, but the fact that the majority that we're experiencing are MIPs and bike theft, which are nonviolent, I think is a very positive as it could be, right? Because somebody
Right.
did commit a crime. But, it's not like we're seeing worse or violent crimes, and that's not to discredit anything that has happened in the past either. But I do want to make that a statement in saying that I think we're very lucky on this campus that the things that are happening, we can utilize resources and we can push out more things to students so that hopefully those levels do go down and then accounts don't happen. For the one individual who did receive that MIP, while it is really unfortunate, and I don't think in any way or form, at least I am following federal guidelines by saying this, it is the job of the police department to report that. It was a crime that occurred. The GJ Sentinel reports every crime that happens in Grand Junction, and so that was also recorded in the GJ Sentinel. And we have the ability and we have to access that information to make sure that we are following federal guidelines. So we are not pinpointing anybody out when those things happen. Every single thing that happens on campus that falls under an arrest needs to be recorded because it's a way of checks and balances. If somebody comes in and says, this happened to me, X, Y, and Z, I need the report, or if somebody files a lawsuit, we need to make sure that we have in writing and that we have within our information pile that we provided this access to the public, because that can lead to a majority of things if we weren't transparent. So
Exactly. And so it really just boils down to people doing their jobs. The police did their job when they contacted this individual and then reported it. The university did their job by making sure that that information was accurately recorded. And really the Criterion did their job simply by making that report. And it's not that there's any sort of joy that comes from that on our behalf. It's just we are a newspaper and we are trying to provide very real world experience for our writers. So we could not provide a accurate real world experience of a newspaper if we didn't have a blotter. And I just like to celebrate the fact that we don't have to report a lot of violent crime.
yes.
And in fact, really when you look at it, you'd mentioned the Daily Sentinel and the Grand Junction Police Department as a whole within all of Mesa County, really we're a lot safer here.
Yes.
If you look at the crime uh, statistics within the surrounding community, Colorado Mesa University is not only a safer university than many of those others that are out there, but it's actually safer here on campus than it is out in the surrounding community.
Right, and I think that's something else to really hone in on as well, is that on campus and the things that are happening on campus are far, I guess I should take that back, not far much safer, but we do have a safer community here on campus and a lower crime rate. And so I think that's something just to really hone in on, because we as a university, that means we're doing our job, and that means we're doing our job really well. There are things that happen, and it is a college campus, but I think it would be discrediting to say that we as a university are not doing our jobs in representing students. So.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that should I don't think you could say it often enough. I think if somebody were to stand up on the rooftops and announce to the entire world about what a safe community, CMU has created for their students, it couldn't be broadcasted loudly enough, because I think that's one of the great things about this university. There's many aspects about CMU, really, to me, that make it a better place to go than anywhere else.
I agree.
But the safety is definitely one of those things, and it's going to make me really happy that my daughter wants to come here when she enters college, because I know that I'm not going to have to worry about her as much as I would somewhere else. And hopefully she won't get an MIP, but
well, yes, let's hope not.
If she does, it's going to end up in the paper.
Right.
Just like in the past, any of the Criterion staff, when they've gotten MIPs, it's ended up in the paper. So there's nothing shaming about it, no intent, that's being addressed toward it, and we do report on our own. So for those who feel like, maybe the Criterion had been engaged in some bullying, or felt like there was some shaming tactics and they felt sorry for this girl, from that standpoint, I also felt sorry for her, and nobody wanted to bring that out. So before I wrap things up, I will just point out one small thing at the end here is unfortunately all those individuals that were so deeply caring about this individual and wishing that her information wasn't being spread, every time they made their comment, every time they engaged with the post, they actually caused it to trend. So we have the job of making the report go out. That's just absolutely necessary in the news. But sometimes by expressing how much they care, some of these people actually are the ones that cause that to spread as much as possible. So it's not really something that you'll normally hear me say, but if you're concerned about how an article may affect somebody, maybe don't share it. Maybe don't comment on it. Maybe kind of let it go its way. I would ultimately really, really prefer that people are just clicking on the positive articles, making their comments on the positive articles, and having those things trend versus something unfortunate that happened to an individual. Now, having heard what Amara had to say about it and what I've said as well, we would like to hear some feedback from any of our listeners. So please feel free to reach out to us. They can contact us either on the Criterion website, thecrite.com, on our Facebook page, or they can email us at criterion@coloradomesa.edu. Thank you so much for joining us, Amara.
Thank you. And I just want to make a small closing statement too. For those students who are feeling maybe discredited, or if you're feeling upset, I do think that it's a great opportunity to reach out to the Criterion and have those one-on-one conversations, or even myself as a student trustee. I'm always available to talk to any student about their concerns, but at the end of the day, it is not unique that the Criterion is doing this or publishing these statements as it is published at any other university and anywhere else in any county. So thank you so much for having me, Chris. This was a great opportunity, and I hope I got to shed some light on just the Clery Act and the information that is provided by universities to any of you students and community members. And so thank you so much for this. This was a fun experience.
Of course. And thank you all so much, those that continue to follow the Criterion. Look for us next time with the 6th edition of the Criterion Podcast.
Okay.
Not so bad, right?
Yeah.